You know, when you say the word Southern rock to the average person, what do you think is the first thing that pops into their head?
Oh, it's immediate. It's an image.
It's an image, right. It's Lynyrd Skynyrd, it's the Allman Brothers, maybe Marshall Tucker.
Absolutely. It's the hard-charging bands. It's, guitars on fire, both literally and figuratively. It's a certain kind of raw energy.
But if you then bring up the Atlanta rhythm section, ARS, the whole vibe changes.
It does. You get a totally different reaction. People might start humming, the opening to So Into You, or they'll think of that really smooth, sultry feel of Imaginary Lover.
Yeah, that polished, almost studio perfect sound. And because of that, they often get put in this box, right? They're just soft rock.
And that label, soft rock, it just does a massive, massive disservice to their actual story.
It really does. Because underneath all that radio-friendly polish, their journey,
Yeah.
it embodies one of the most tragic and, frankly, statistically jarring patterns in the entire music world.
It's a really harsh truth. You have this band, ARS, who were the absolute ultimate musical professionals. I mean, top-tier craftsmen.
The best of the best.
And yet they went through all the same intense personal and physical tolls as their peers. The chronic illness, the struggles with substances, the early deaths. It was all there.
So that's really the contradiction we want to get into today. We're going to examine the incredible, and I mean incredible, talent of guys like the guitarist Barry Bailey, who's so often called unsung, and the songwriter J.R. Cobb.
And our mission here is to connect those personal stories, those struggles, and their eventual fates to some really unsettling findings about musician mortality rates.
We want to unpack the entire path of ARS, from their beginnings, not as a garage band, but as, anonymous session players, all the way up to their platinum success and playing for the President of the United States.
And in doing that, we're going to reveal this enormous, often hidden price tag that comes attached to that level of fame and that kind of lifestyle.
So, by the end of this, you're going to understand why ARS was so much more than just the band that had that one big hit with Spooky. Okay, so to really get the story of the Atlanta rhythm section, you have to just completely throw out the typical rock and roll myth.
You have to. The whole idea of the scrappy garage band just does not apply here.
Not at all. These guys weren't, slogging through tiny bars in the middle of nowhere hoping for their big break. They were already seasoned professionals. That's what makes their beginnings so unique.
It's so crucial to understand the environment they came from. ARS didn't form around, say, a charismatic frontman or some singular artistic vision.
Right.
They came together because they were already the working, functional, and frankly, highly accomplished house band for a recording studio.
And not just any studio. We're talking about Studio One in Doraville, Georgia, right around 1970.
That's the place. And that studio environment, it was really the heart of the whole operation. It was all overseen by their manager and producer, a guy named Buddy Bowie.
And Bowie was absolutely central to this. He wasn't just forming a collective of talent. He was also a key songwriter for this group.
Which meant that from day one, from the very beginning, their focus was on creating commercially viable, really well-engineered music. There was no messing around.
And when you say their pedigree was high, I mean, that's an understatement. We're talking about legitimate veterans of the music industry.
We really are. These were not new kids on the block, a huge part of the founding lineup. They had been the driving force behind the Classics Four.
Now, stop there for a second. Let's let that sink in. The Classics Four. This is the group responsible for some of the biggest, most enduring soft rock hits of the entire late 1960s.
Exactly. We're talking about songs like Stormy, Traces, and of course, the original 60s version of Spooky.
These were sophisticated, beautifully arranged songs that just completely dominated AM radio back then.
And the guys who would go on to form ARS, like J.R. Cobb, who co-wrote those massive hits, and the drummer, Robert Nicks, the keyboardist, Dean Daughtry, they had already experienced major national success. They knew the formula for a hit record inside and out.
They didn't have to guess. They'd already done it.
They'd already done it. And then, to complement that Classics the Feath crew, the group also brought in musicians from another band called the Candymen.
Which is another detail that just tells you everything you need to know about their professional foundation.
It does. Because the Candymen's big claim to fame was they had served as the official backing band for Roy Orbison.
Roy Orbison. I mean, just think about that for a second. The level of discipline, the touring experience, the musical precision you would need to be the backing unit for a global superstar of that caliber.
You're talking about musicians who understood dynamics, travel, consistency, all on a world stage. So you're putting professional hit songwriters together with international touring veterans, all in one studio.
It's a supergroup, but one that's built on pure expertise, not on, youthful rebellion or image.
And the reason they decided to make that transition from being hired guns to being the headliners themselves, it was surprisingly pragmatic.
Yeah, it wasn't some big artistic falling out, was it?
Not at all. They decided to stop working exclusively for other stars because they looked around and recognized their own potential. They wanted to be, as they put it, recording for their own selves.
It was an artistic push, but it was also a business decision.
Completely. It was a financial calculation.
Yeah.
They figured they could make more money by focusing on their own records, where they would control the masters and the publishing rights. It was just smart business.
The name they ended up choosing is almost a punchline, given how much they seem to want to avoid all those cliches of the Southern rock scene.
Oh, yeah. Especially when you hear the alternate name that was suggested and thankfully rejected.
What was it?
Blackbush.
Blackbush. Oh my God, can you even imagine?
No. That name would have put them squarely in that leather, fringe, and motorcycles category that they were trying so hard to avoid.
So instead they go with Atlanta Rhythm Section.
Which was actually a suggestion from a music publisher named Bill Lowry. And they chose it specifically because they thought it was, generic, it was tongue-in-cheek.
It was on purpose.
Totally on purpose. It sounded exactly like what they were. The house band of a successful regional studio. It reflected their identity as professional musicians based in Atlanta, not some band born out of a mystical southern swamp.
But all that professionalism, that pedigree,
Yeah.
it didn't immediately translate to commercial success.
No, their self-titled debut album in 1972 was a pretty slow burn, and that caused a little bit of friction in the band early on.
Right, because their original singer, Rodney Justo, he left pretty soon after.
And he left for the most professional session musician reason ever. He had a better paying gig lined up somewhere else.
He prioritized stability over the long shot. You can't blame him.
Not at all. And so he was replaced by Ronnie Hammond. Now, what's interesting about Hammond is that he was often described as being really shy.
That's a fascinating contrast, isn't it? You have this ultimate collection of technical pros, these highly disciplined, experienced musicians.
Fronted by a man who is inherently reserved. It's not the typical frontman persona.
No. But despite that slow start, and despite their sound being, as people said, a lot softer than Skynyrd or Hatchet, their reputation inside the music industry was absolutely stellar.
And we have to bring up the legendary quote from Lynyrd Skynyrd's own Ronnie Van Zandt.
Yes, he stated it just plain as day. He considered ARS the best band from the South.
And think about who that's coming from. That is the highest possible compliment, especially coming from the leader of what many would consider their fiercest competition.
Van Zandt's comment, it wasn't about radio play or ticket sales or spectacle.
No, it was a pure recognition of their superior musical craftsmanship, their understated song skill. While Skynyrd was all about that raw power and the Allmans were about bluesy improvisation, ARS was about precision, melody, and these really sophisticated arrangements.
They were the musicians.
That's the perfect way to put it. The casual listener might have missed the technical brilliance that was embedded in a song like Doraville, but their peers absolutely did not.
And that really sets up the whole paradox of their career, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They were almost too polished for the hard rock crowd, but maybe a little too complex for simple pop radio.
They were just waiting for the rest of the musical landscape to catch up to their very specific brand of highly produced, professional Southern rock. So once they got Ronnie Hammond in the door and really solidified that lineup, they were just constantly working, constantly in Studio One, building this deep body of work we were talking about.
They were. But that breakthrough, despite all their skill and their history, it still took some time.
It really did. Their first minor hit was a song called Doraville, which was, as you mentioned, this kind of affectionate ode to their literal home base.
Their headquarters.
Exactly. But that didn't even arrive until 1974. And it was on an album that they, I think, rather cynically titled Third Annual Pipe Dream.
That title, Third Annual Pipe Dream, it just speaks volumes, doesn't it? It says so much about the frustration they must have been feeling.
You can just feel it. Here they are with this incredible technical skill, this professional grounding, and they're watching other bands, sometimes less skilled bands, just skyrocket to fame around them.
And it took another 3 full albums after that before they finally landed their first undeniable major chart buster.
That was So Into You in 1977. That was the one that finally kicked the door down.
But once that door was open, man, they walked right through it. The absolute peak of their commercial success, their artistic visibility, it had to be 1978's Champagne Jam.
Oh, without a doubt. That album didn't just go platinum. It cemented their reputation as this powerhouse studio band that could deliver these huge-sounding, sophisticated hits.
And that album also gave us one of their most successful and most storied singles, Imaginary Lover.
This track was huge. It rocketed all the way up to number 7 on the Hot 100. And the success story behind it is just a perfect example of how the music industry sometimes runs completely on accident.
This is the famous playback incident.
The playback incident. It sounds like something you'd see in a movie, a mistake that accidentally launches a career.
And that's pretty much what happened.
That is exactly what it was. So the story goes that the 33 RPM album version of the track was mistakenly played on a radio station at 45 p.m.
So for anyone listening, that means everything is sped up. The tempo, the pitch, everything, including the vocals.
And that was the key. The unintended consequence of this was startling. The sped-up vocals sounded uncannily similar to Stevie Nicks.
Stevie Nicks, a Fleetwood Mac. That's incredible.
It caused an absolute frenzy. Listeners, thinking they had just stumbled upon some new mystery track by a massive superstar, started calling the radio station in droves.
They were demanding to know what it was. What was that new Stevie Nicks song?
Exactly. This completely accidental, technically flawed playback created such a massive spike in demand that the record label couldn't ignore it. They were basically forced to rush the official single release to capitalize on the buzz.
It just goes to show, sometimes the difference between a minor hit and a major chart success is literally a slight speed shift on a turntable. Amazing.
It really is. And then, just a year later, in 1979, they had another huge hit with their cover of Spooky, which got to number 17.
And this track is such a perfect little microcosm of their entire history, all wrapped up in one song.
It ties everything together all the way back to their origins. As we mentioned, J.R. Cobb, a co-founder and a major creative engine for ARS, had co-written the original 1960s Classics 4 version.
So when they decided to revisit it as ARS, they weren't just doing a simple cover song.
No, they were reclaiming and reimagining their own history. It was their song.
And musically, the contrast between the two versions is just fascinating to listen to.
It really is. The original Classics 4 version was very constrained by 1960s pop production. It was cut quickly. It was engineered very precisely to fit the extremely rigid time constraints of AM radio. It had to be under 3 minutes.
But the ARS cover, on the other hand, was born in the era of album-oriented rock, AOR. The length of the song wasn't the main restriction anymore. The performance was.
And they took full advantage of that. The ARS version features 2 nice jams, these instrumental sections that allowed their incredible musical prowess, especially Barry Bailey's subtle, brilliant guitar work, to really shine.
It was their chance to play the song the way they might have wanted to back in the 60s, completely unbound by the demand for a 2-minute, 50-second radio edit. It became a showcase for their instrumental mastery.
And that whole late 1970s run for them was genuinely astonishing. We're talking about major singles like I'm Not Gonna Let It Bother Me Tonight and Do It or Die, which was yet another hit co-written by the tireless J.R. Cobb.
And maybe the biggest cultural recognition they got came in 1978 when they played on the lawn of the White House.
That is a landmark moment for any band. They played for President Jimmy Carter's son, Chip, for his 28th birthday party.
For a Southern rock band, even one that came out of the more commercial Atlanta studio scene, getting that kind of national, even presidential exposure just cemented their status as true crossover artists.
They weren't just a regional rock band anymore. At that point, they were an established American institution.
But the road.
Yeah.
The road always comes with its own unique set of problems. And some comedy, too, as these touring anecdotes really show.
Oh, yeah.
I want to spend a moment on the 1978 Houston concert cancellation.
Yeah.
Because it just highlights the sheer logistical nightmare that touring was back then.
It's a perfect illustration of how fast things can go completely wrong when you're reliant on human performance night after night.
So the opening act, a band called Stillwater, they'd already played their set.
Yeah, they played for a crowd of 10,000 people. The place packed. Everyone's ready for the headliner. And then at 9:30 p.m., the whole show gets canceled.
And it wasn't because of weather or a fire or some technical failure.
No, it was because the drummer, Robert Nicks, was so debilitated by a case of gout that he physically could not sit down behind the drum kit.
Gout. It took down a rock concert for 10,000 people.
It did. And you just have to imagine being the production manager, Jeff Jackson, who had to go out and deliver that news to a massive, expectant crowd.
Oh, that's the worst job in the world at that moment.
The story goes he received just massive backlash, all sorts of verbal abuse, when he made the announcement from center stage. And that moment apparently birthed one of the essential pieces of touring wisdom.
Which is?
Don't give people bad news from center stage. Go behind the PA system. It's a lesson born from the anger of 10,000 disappointed fans.
That is a very practical, hard-won piece of advice.
I would say so.
And on a slightly lighter note, there's also that fantastic image from their tour in Japan.
Yes, the ultimate culture clash that comes with global touring. They all went out to a sushi restaurant, and they were following the local custom, so the band and the whole crew had to leave their footwear at the entrance.
Which, for them, included impossibly large, and I'm guessing very dirty, cowboy boots.
Exactly, so you can just picture it. This huge, imposing pile of rugged Western footwear just sitting there in the foyer of a quiet, pristine, traditional Japanese restaurant.
Oh, that's incredible.
And that's exactly what happened. The regular diners who were waiting to be seated or coming in, they just gawked and pointed and murmured at this bizarre collection of gigantic boots, completely separate from their owners.
It's a funny visual, for sure.
It is, but it also captures that relentless grind of taking that deeply Southern, deeply American lifestyle and music all over the world, the constant shift, the exhaustion, the demands. It never stops. And that's really where the personal toll starts to begin.
You know, when you think about it, it's those high points, like the platinum records and playing on the White House lawn, and then those low points, the cancellations, the demanding travel, that really shape the lives of these artists we talk about.
Absolutely. The deeper you look into the careers of these retro stars, the more you see how interconnected the success and the struggle really become. We're really only scratching the surface of the incredible stories that the history of popular music holds.
So if you are enjoying this exploration into the hidden costs of fame, and you want to make sure you don't miss any of our future conversations, this is just one of the in-depth explorations we do here on Retro Celeb Talk.
That's right.
So go ahead and hit that subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening on. That way you'll get these fascinating stories and insights delivered directly to you every time we release one.
Subscribing really helps us continue peeling back the layers on these complex legacies. Now, let's get back to the individuals who really paid the highest price.
We really do have to shift our focus now. We've talked about the professional successes, but we need to move to the deep personal costs. Because that demanding career, the constant travel, it began to take a really devastating toll on the individuals involved. And we have to start with the lead guitarist, Barry Bailey.
Bailey's legacy is just immense. He was the one who provided that defining, polished guitar tone that was the absolute signature of ARS. He played on every single album from 1970 until he finally retired in 2006.
He was the musical engine room.
He was. But his departure, his retirement, it was heartbreakingly forced upon him. In 2005, he received a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis, MS.
Which is a chronic disease that affects the central nervous system. A terrible diagnosis for anyone, but especially for a musician who relies on that fine motor control.
And he showed such incredible dedication. He actually continued to play for one more year after the diagnosis, but the physical limitations of MS ultimately proved to be too great for a touring musician. It just became impossible.
And tragically, the compounding sadness just didn't stop there for him.
No. His retirement was pretty much cemented because his wife, Dawn, was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of cancer, and she died in that very same year, 2006.
So he lost his career and his partner almost at the exact same time.
It's an unimaginable amount of loss to deal with at once.
And the cruelty of that disease, the MS, it continued long after he left the stage. As it progressed over the years, Barry Bailey eventually lost the ability to use his arms.
Think about that for a moment. One of the best guitarists from the South, a man who was praised for his subtle, nuanced tone and his incredible touch. He had the fundamental physical ability to play his instrument taken away from him.
It's a devastating fate for any artist. It's just beyond cruel.
It is. And it makes those moments of recognition he did get all the more important. On June 19, 2009, he was honored with Barry Bailey Day, and he was given the key to the city of Decatur, Georgia. Just a small sign of recognition for his massive contribution to music.
The message the band released when they were honoring him, it speaks volumes about his kind of hidden genius. They acknowledged that he was often called unsung.
Which meant that outside of the musician community, maybe not enough people knew his name. He wasn't a flashy guitar hero in the traditional sense.
Right. But the band, they emphasized the counterpoint so forcefully. They wrote, "Unsung my ass. If you heard him, you sang his praises."
And that phrase, it just sums up the whole ARS paradox perfectly. Unimpeachable talent that was sometimes overshadowed by the flashier, rougher-edged bands in their genre. Bailey passed away in 2022 at the age of 73.
Now let's turn our attention to the songwriter and the co-founder, J.R. Cobb. He died in 2019 at age 75 from a heart attack. And his life story reveals this really challenging, sometimes traumatic foundation, which is an absolutely critical piece of context when we look at the demands of a rock and roll life.
Cobb was born in 1944, and he had a very difficult start to his childhood. In 1953, when he was just 9 years old, his father left the family. His mother really struggled to provide care.
And so, consequently, he and his two siblings were placed in the Baptist Children's Home in Jacksonville.
Being separated from your family like that, being placed in an institutional setting at 9 years old, it must have been incredibly disruptive and formative for a young boy.
It had to be.
It was. Cobb himself reflected on that experience later in his life, and he called it the best and worst thing that could have happened to me.
The best and worst thing. What did he mean by that?
Well, the best part, he said, was that the environment instilled in him a remarkably strong work ethic. It was a necessity to survive in that kind of setting. But the emotional scar was very deep. The worst part, he recalled, was the emotional impact of it being scary not being a family anymore.
That sense of needing stability and at the same time feeling this void of family connection. That feels so important when we look at the psychological makeup of people who are drawn to the highly unstable, high-risk world of touring rock music.
I think you're exactly right. That early trauma, that need to constantly work just to survive and succeed, it translates directly into the relentless nature of a session musician's life.
He stayed there until he was 16, and he graduated high school before he became a welder.
A welder. A far cry from being a platinum-selling songwriter. But that work ethic, it stuck with him, and it served him incredibly well throughout his entire career.
And that work ethic led to just astonishing output. He co-wrote 17 documented hit songs. That includes the Classics 4 Gold certified successes, Stormy and Traces. He was constantly writing, constantly producing.
He eventually left ARS in 1987, but it wasn't a retirement by any means. He just shifted his focus. He concentrated exclusively on session work and songwriting.
Which allowed him to maintain that professional dedication, but without the brutal touring schedule.
And he toured with some genuine giants during his post-ARS years. He served as a session player for the country supergroup The Highwaymen.
That's Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, Chris Christopherson, and Willie Nelson. Talk about trading one set of heavy hitters for another.
It's incredible, and his enduring contribution was recognized. He was inducted into the Georgia Music Hall of Fame in 1993, and then the Alabama Music Hall of Fame in 1997.
So when we connect all these individual stories, Bailey's severe illness, Cobb's foundational trauma, and his relentless work ethic, we also have to remember the broader struggles that the group faced.
Absolutely. Ronnie Hammond, the lead singer, he struggled significantly with alcohol dependency and with depression, which is a pattern that is tragically familiar across the entire industry.
And there's the very sobering fact that Dean Daughtry, the keyboardist, he passed away recently. And that means that the entire classic six-man lineup of the Atlanta Rhythm section is now deceased.
It just underscores the fragility of life in this profession. And Daughtry himself, he provided this chilling moment of confirmation about the ever-present shadow of tragedy in the Southern rock world.
This was when he was asked if ARS ever had their own private band jet.
Yes, and he said they deliberately chose not to have one. And he specifically cited the Skynyrd thing.
He's talking about the 1977 plane crash that killed Ronnie Van Zandt and several other members of Lynyrd Skynyrd. That event just hung over the entire genre like a dark cloud.
It did. And ARS, despite their smooth sound, they chose to fly first-class commercial out of Atlanta instead. It just confirms that the fear, the awareness of that violent, sudden risk, it was very real, even for the quote-unquote soft rock guys.
So we've established pretty clearly that the Atlanta Rhythm section faced massive personal struggles, from chronic illness to addiction, mirroring the tragic fates of so many of their contemporaries. But now we're going to pivot to the statistical reality. We're using the ARS experience as a necessary lens to understand the occupational hazards that are faced by popular musicians as a whole. What does the research actually tell us about their life expectancy?
This is where we stop dealing with anecdotes and we start confronting established statistical patterns. And these are drawn from major research efforts that have investigated the mortality rates, the cause of death, the patterns over time for popular musicians who died between 1950 and 2014.
And the conclusion is?
The conclusion is not just alarming, it's genuinely devastating.
Okay, so give us the baseline truth. What is the fundamental statistical risk of being a popular musician?
The finding is clear and it's unequivocal. Popular musicians have a significantly shortened life expectancy when you compare them to the general population.
Significantly shortened.
Across the entire age range that was studied, the mortality rates for popular musicians were approximately twice as high as those of the comparable general population in both the UK and in North America.
Twice as high. That is an enormous level of excess mortality. That suggests a fundamental systemic hazard that's just baked into the profession itself.
It absolutely does. And so the researchers then drilled down into what the primary drivers of this excess mortality were.
What did they find?
They identified two main categories. First was violent deaths, and that category encompassed suicide, homicide, and accidental death, which includes things like drug overdoses and vehicular deaths. And the second main category was liver disease.
And was this risk spread evenly across all ages, or did that whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle claim its victims early on?
It was very much the latter. The highest concentration of these excess deaths occurred overwhelmingly in the under 25 age group, and then the risk reduced chronologically from there.
So the early career phase is statistically the most dangerous time to be a famous musician.
By far. The research strongly suggests that the intense pressure, the instant fame, the easy access to substances in early life, all of that contributes directly to these horrifying figures.
Let's focus in specifically on the rock genre, which is where ARS lived, and its connection to the data on cause of death.
The data on rock musicians is particularly grim in two specific areas. The rock genre experienced significantly higher than expected deaths from accidents. The research documented 225 excess accidental deaths just in the rock category.
Wow.
And they also saw 28 excess reported deaths from suicide in that same group.
You know, when we hear accidental death in the context of rock music, our minds often jump to these extreme events like plane crashes, the Skynyrd thing. But I suspect the data is pointing to something much more common and pervasive.
It is. While those tragic high-profile accidents do happen, the vast majority of accidental deaths that are tracked here are related to the destructive touring lifestyle.
So car accidents.
Vehicular accidents, often involving impaired driving, and of course drug overdoses. This reflects that constant movement, the exhaustion, the total lack of routine that defines life on the road, where self-medication becomes incredibly common.
And then there's the second major driver, excess mortality you mentioned. Liver disease.
Liver disease is the clearest statistical indicator of prolonged high rates of alcohol consumption. It's the long-term consequence. And rock, country, and metal genres all reported excess deaths from liver-related diseases for musicians under the age of 65.
So it's not just a rock thing.
Not at all. And even when researchers looked at the population over 65, rock, country, jazz, and R&B musicians still showed excess liver-related deaths compared to the general population. This wasn't just some youthful phase for many of them. It was a chronic condition that followed them their whole lives.
So what the research is essentially arguing is that the musical genre, be it rock or country or metal, it's not just an aesthetic choice. It's a defined and statistically hazardous lifestyle choice.
That is precisely it. The strong association between rock and country musicians and these higher accidental and liver-related deaths, it points directly to high rates of substance abuse, with alcohol being a primary culprit that's identified across the entire lifespan of these artists.
And if we look at the sheer numbers for famous rock and pop musicians in North America, what was the median age of death?
The median age of death was only 45.2 years.
45? That's staggering.
It is. For European artists, it was slightly younger, at 39.6 years.
Wow.
In so many other professions, 45 is the beginning of your mid-career climb. For famous musicians, it's often the end of the line.
And the risk for the younger musicians is truly off the charts.
It really is. For famous musicians between the ages of 20 and 30, the risk of death was 2 to 3 times higher than the general UK population. The researchers actually struggled to find comparable statistics for any other high-prestige profession that carried such a massive mortality risk.
And even as time went on and maybe awareness grew, the numbers didn't get much better.
That's right. Even when survival rates were tracked post-1980, survival for musicians remained stubbornly lower than the population comparators.
So when we take all of this data and we synthesize it, what does it tell us about the careers of the Atlanta Rhythm Section members who survived well into their 70s?
Well, the study's grim conclusion is that many musicians in these high-risk genres simply may never live long enough to acquire the illnesses of middle and old age.
They die before they can get old.
Exactly. So when we look at figures like Barry Bailey, who died at 73, or J.R. Cobb, who died at 75, we realize that, statistically speaking, they were beating the odds of their own profession by nearly 3 decades.
So their survival to old age, despite facing severe challenges like MS and depression and heart attack, it's the exception that proves the rule established by this data.
It is. They lived long enough to die of what we would consider natural causes, which is statistically tragically uncommon for their field.
It makes their personal struggles and their eventual fates, even for those who died later in life, feel like this quiet victory against a fundamentally dangerous occupational hazard.
So this exploration has really taken us deep into the life and the legacy of the Atlanta Rhythm Section. We saw a band that was built on the absolute highest level of professional studio craftsmanship. They were capable of producing these flawlessly polished hits like Imaginary Lover. And yet at the same time, they were forced to navigate the intense, life-threatening personal and professional pressures that are just inherent in the rock world. And these are pressures which, as the statistics confirm, drastically shorten the lives of their peers.
And that contrast, the smooth music hiding the rough reality, that leads us to the final provocative thought for today.
Yeah.
ARS, despite their softer sound and their technical focus, they faced the exact same hazards as their harder rocking contemporaries. So if the popular musician life is statistically so hazardous that it causes death rates that are twice the national average, we have to look deeper than just the immediate causes of death.
We have to ask a tougher question. What constitutional factors or adverse childhood experiences, like the separation and the subsequent need for a relentless work ethic that J.R. Cobb detailed from his time in the children's home? What factors like that might the music industry be unknowingly attracting?
Is the pressure of fame uniquely destructive to those who are already carrying some kind of foundational emotional trauma?
It's a really important question.
It forces us to reevaluate the true cost of the music we love. We're not just consuming entertainment. We're consuming the product of lives that are lived under intense duress and real danger. The price paid by these artists, even the polite professional ones like ARS, was absolutely enormous.
It certainly forces us to move beyond that romanticized rock star narrative and to view this profession with the seriousness that the mortality data really demands.
We really encourage you to seek out the deeper catalog of ARS, especially those 1970s Polydor albums, and just listen to the craftsmanship that Ronnie Van Zandt himself respected so highly. Thank you so much for joining us for this extensive look.
And if you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Retro Celeb Talk. We'll see you next time for another exploration into the lives and legacies of popular figures.